A very warm welcome to Police Headquarters. Absolutely delighted to see so many members of the media and the press here today from a number of different sources. And I'm delighted because the relationship between the police service and the local media is a critical relationship as far as I'm concerned, and one that should be a positive relationship. So you just heard my press officer say the intention will be this will be one of many opportunities to talk with you, and the first offer I make, of course, is if you want to speak to me individually at a different time after this general press conference, feel free to go through Diane and make an appointment, and do my best to turn up at any stage to assist you with anything you want to know about policing the British Virgin Islands. You've heard I'm Michael Matthews, prefer to be known as Mick, only my mother calls me Michael. So I know that that's been picked up already in the press as the local name. 34 years in policing I've just passed. Spent most of my time policing in the UK. Started my career in the Kent Force down in the southeast of England, where I did 23 years, mostly as a detective and working in criminal intelligence, before I did the senior command course in 2004 that ended up with me transferring across to a county force called Gloucestershire, which is in the southwest of the UK, where I went through the ranks of assistant chief, deputy chief and chief constable. So I finished my career in the UK at the end of 2012 when I was asked to consider taking a post for the Ministry of Defence, UK Ministry of Defence, working at an overseas territory in the sovereign bases of Cyprus, and that's where I spent the last nearly 4 years being responsible for policing the sovereign bases, which includes around about 10,000 military personnel and their families, and about 14,000 local Cypriot families. A very diverse population. I became aware of this post being vacant last November. That was when I became aware of it, and applied without any hesitation to come to the British Virgin Islands. Not because the British Virgin Islands is a beautiful place to come and live, as some have suggested already, albeit, let's be frank, who'd be silly enough to turn that down? It's a wonderful place, it's got wonderful people. But the job is what attracted me. I was attracted to a fresh challenge, I was attracted to a high-performing force, and it's the force that I really want to make my first main opening remarks about, because you've all heard about me already. The Royal Virgin Islands Police Force have been performing exceptionally well under very difficult circumstances. I want to start by paying credit not only to the Deputy Commissioner, Alwyn James, who was the Acting Commissioner for nearly 9 months, but also the officers sat either side of me here, who are the senior officers working with Alwyn, alongside a number of officers who had to act up in rank to deliver policing, deliver safety and deliver security to the communities of the British Virgin Islands. And what did that look like at the end of 2015? Well, it looked like an incredible 14% reduction in recorded crime. 14%. That means 14% less crimes were actually recorded by the police service compared to the previous year. But probably more importantly is these officers and their teams that work for them detected 48% of crime on the Virgin Islands. 48%. To put that in context, roughly that means 48 out of every 100 criminals have been caught and successfully prosecuted or dealt with through the criminal justice system here in the British Virgin Islands. Now let me tell you, the average internationally is around about 25% for a detection rate. So to be able to deliver nearly double that with the resources that were available to these officers, I think is an accolade to their skills and to the hard work and efforts of the officers that work for them. But it has not come without problems, and it's disappointing to me personally when I arrived to discover a number of officers currently interdicted or under investigation, and you'll all be aware that most recently officers have been arrested and charged with criminal offences. I make no judgment about the most current charges Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. That is a matter for the courts now. However, it is absolutely right and proper that any suspicion of corrupt behaviour or corrupt practice must be thoroughly investigated. And whilst there may have been frustrations both in the community, in the media, and indeed within the force with some of our own officers, these kind of investigations take time. And that particular investigation had been going on for months. Been going on for so long, in fact, that I was briefed on it in December. I was briefed on the details of what was likely to happen. So there's good reason why these things don't come out in public very early on, and that the work that's going on behind the scenes has to remain secret, covert, to ensure that the best evidence is captured and that justice can be seen to be done. But I think the important thing that I want to express very deeply and sincerely here today is something that I said to a meeting with all of my officers, or as many officers as I could get in one room last Wednesday, which was my first opportunity to address the force. And that is simply this. The Royal Virgin Islands Police Force is not corrupt. It never has been corrupt. It never will be corrupt. To say it is corrupt is a smear upon all of the hard work of the honest, intelligent and dedicated officers that work for the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. What is clear is there is evidence that there has been some corrupt practice by a very small minority. And we will continue to target, to tackle and to root out any form of corruption within policing. But this force is no different to any other force around the world. There are a few bad apples, but a few bad apples doesn't rot the whole barrel. And getting a proper investigation underway was the absolute right thing to do, and seeking to root out corruption wherever it may exist will continue to be the desire and the focus of this administration. So I finish by just saying this. The force faces significant challenges here, not least of which we need to increase the levels of confidence in the local community. Because any time there is an internal investigation, any time police officers are arrested, that is bound to have a negative impact upon the community's confidence in local policing. My job as the leader, of course, is to seek to restore confidence, increase confidence and sustain confidence. And we do that through trust and through working with our local communities. And trust, ladies and gentlemen, starts here and now. That's why I'm putting myself, if you like, openly here in front of you today to say from day one, I want to have a trusting, open and transparent relationship with all of you. Your job is to report, and you do a valuable job. You're the eyes and the ears of the community. I might not always like what I read. I might not always agree with what you report, but you are independent, and rightly so, and you're entitled to report what you believe needs to be reported. But all I will say is this: in a transparent, joined up partnership that I'd like to have with you all, I will seek to give you the information that you need, that is accurate, that is timely, and where possible, given to you as soon as possible. There are always occasions, due to operational reasons or even due to a current court case, that I can't give you the answer you might be looking for. I might not be able to name somebody. I might not be able to tell you exactly what's happening in an investigation at that moment in time. But that is not me being awkward. There'll be good operational reasons why that can't happen at that moment in time. If you choose to go ahead and print a story without speaking to me or my office, and then ask us for an opinion afterwards, you can only accept that we're unlikely to make too much comment. And my only plea is, if you have a story, bring it to us, ask us about it. If we can help you add value to that story, we will. If we can't, we'll tell you. And then, of course, you have the absolute right to print as you see fit. But what I see as a mistake that has happened to me in my career many, many times is that sometimes a story has broke and then the police are asked about it afterwards. And by then, sometimes facts are out there that are inaccurate or don't show the whole picture. Well, of course, that doesn't do policing any good. It doesn't do confidence in policing any good. It doesn't do your reputation any good either. Because, of course, the public also expect you to report accurately on what's happening here. So I go back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is a really important relationship for me and something that I want to sustain. And already I know some of you, because I smiled as I looked around the room and recognised some of the faces. Some of you have already caught me on the street. Katie actually stopped me in a shop doorway the other day. Davion, you caught me at the governor's house the other day. And I hope you've realised that I will stop and I will talk to you and I will give you an interview if I can do that, if it's practically possible. I think we found ourselves trying to have an interview with lots going on in the background at the same time. But if we can do it, we'll do it. So there you go, I've set out my stall. I'm delighted to be here. I don't underestimate the challenge that this job will bring. That's been made very clear to me by the Governor, by the Premier and his Cabinet, and indeed by my colleagues sat here. But then policing never was easy. But I need to justify to you my actions, how I spend public money, and to guarantee to you that I will use the police resources given to me in the best way possible. So that's my job. I now open up for any questions you may have.
Good morning, Zan Lewis, ZVV Radio. Pleased to meet you again, Commissioner.
Nice to see you again.
When you applied for this job in November, there was a previous commissioner who had refused to renew his contract. There was a commissioner who had said that he would take up the job, but decided after not to take it up. And then, weren't you worried at the time to say one commissioner did not renew, the next one chose not to come again? Didn't you attempt at any time to find out why this guy was not coming, why the commissioner not renew his contract? Won't it scare you, putting your head in something that it could be dangerous at the time, or probably more challenging?
I think that's a really good question, first of all, Zan. Thank you for that. I made a deliberate decision not to make those inquiries. It would have been very easy for me to have contacted the individuals concerned and said, okay, what's put you off? But I think, everyone is entitled to make their own decisions based upon their own perception of something. Did I think it was dangerous coming here? No. Policing is dangerous by its very nature, unfortunately, but on occasions. Most of the time, a policing career is pretty safe. But I've gone through my career and I've been in dangerous situations. And my last job as the Chief of Police in the sovereign bases, I was responsible for providing security whilst the military were flying missions to Syria and Iraq. It don't get much more dangerous than that, to be frank, in terms of the threat and potential threat of terrorism. So, no, fear didn't grip me at all. What gripped me was fascination. A high-performing force, but loads to do, lots of things that I could see that could be developed. And I felt, you know what, I think I've got the experience to come and offer something. And I think the important thing about your question as well is that I don't think any of those previous commissioners or myself, when we come here, I don't think we set ourselves up to come and tell you how to do things here. I think what people set out to do is come and join a team and try and work together and just bring something else to the party. And I know I've used that phrase before, but I hope I can bring something else to the party to add value to policing here.
Melissa Edwards, BVI Platinum News.
Commissioner,
you spoke about some of the challenges faced by the police force. Can you pinpoint some of those? And secondly, you spoke about several changes in terms of dealing with corruption, rooting out corruption, and allowing for confidence in the police force. Can we expect any radical changes from you, or just moderate?
Okay. Well, first of all, challenges. One of the priorities that I'm looking at already with the Deputy Commissioner is about recruitment. The force has been under strength for a period of time. That's not through anybody's fault, it's just a fact of life. and the force also faces the prospect of potential retirements in the coming year to 2 years. All of that has to be taken into account, and we have to do a risk assessment about what does that mean in terms of our ability to police. So one of the challenges, of course, is to work out what can be afforded in terms of new recruits, and then striking the balance between whether we go for what is a cheaper option of bringing in experienced transferees, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the local population, compared to recruiting directly from the local population and ensuring that the force actually reflects the community it serves. And you know, one of the big challenges here is I think getting everybody to understand that the best police services around the world are the most diverse police services in terms of their content. So, for example, let's be open about this, having a white commissioner does cause some concern and distrust among some elements of the population. I've been made aware of that. I've commented on it already. But you know, this is about diversity. And the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force is made up of a diverse number of officers, expats, officers from around different forces in the Caribbean, and local belongers. My job and the challenge is to attract more locals, also to look to the future about making sure that local people feel that they are represented throughout the ranks, not just at the operational end, but at the same time ensure that we have the right levels of skill and experience to deliver policing across the range that's required here. So that's the sort of first sort of area of challenge that I'm looking at. In terms of the corruption side of things, what can you expect from me? Well, we already, as you're aware, have a inquiry in place, and that's dealing with matters that are already public knowledge, and a number of officers are still interdicted. What I want to do first of all is I want to work out how long we're going to sit waiting to deal with interdicted officers, because it seems a very slow process. And having a number of officers who may be completely innocent but not able to perform their duties is a problem for the force, and it's a problem for the public. So I'm going to be focusing on what's happening around those officers, reviewing all of those cases. The second element to your question is this is more about a counter-corruption strategy, and in the medium term we will develop and implement a full counter-corruption strategy, and that has started. My staff officer who sits upstairs, one of our inspectors, has just spent the last week in Miami with a counter-corruption team that's been set up, looking at what good international best practice looks like and what can be brought back here to the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And as I said in my opening address, I will not stand for corruption within the police service. It destroys confidence, it destroys the people, it destroys reputations. So if there is any more to be rooted out, it will be rooted out. And I sit on my record. If anybody wants to go and dig through the archives, they will see that in the first year of taking over the sovereign-based police in Cyprus, I ended up having to remove and dismiss a number of officers for corruption. It's not unique to the Virgin Islands.
Just one follow-up, in relation to recruitment, and you spoke about encouraging more locals. That has been one of the issues, and I think in relation to there have been contentions in relation to the promotional exam.
Yes.
I'm sure you're aware of that. Can we expect any changes for that, or are you just going to leave the current process?
I've met with the Police Welfare Association, and I've also spoken to the broader force about the promotions and the promotion exams. I'm not going to make an immediate decision on it for the simple reason is this. The minute you start promoting people, ultimately what that leaves is less constables on the street, because everybody moves up a rank, and all that's left is fewer constables. I think we've got to get what I call getting our ducks in a row here, first of all. So the first element for me is I want to get permission, the authority to spend money to recruit. And once I know that we have that and we know how many new recruits we're going to be allowed to bring in, then the second step is to then look at the command structure and to get those promotions dealt with. I understand the reasons why They didn't go ahead. I understand the concerns have been raised. They've been raised with me by the Police Welfare Association, and I've given them, and I can give you my full assurance that they will go ahead. They will be fair, they'll be open, they'll be transparent, and I've even told the Welfare Association that any promotion interview that I'm involved in, they are welcome to observe independently the process from start to finish by being in the room with me.
Malika McPherson, the Allenton newspaper. Commissioner, we've been hearing the words corruption, public confidence. You repeated them, and you did indicate that you had a chance to interact with the force. Well, how would you describe the morale? And also, as the new head coming in, you must have heard some complaints from officers within the force. You might not be able to give us details, but can you repeat the ones that continue to come up?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, morale. It's you know, I'm at risk of repeating myself here, but it is a fact that around the world, wherever I've worked, and I've worked in the UK, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in the United States, Cyprus, and now here, morale always comes up in the conversation, and people will say, oh, morale's dreadful. When I took over the sovereign bases in 2013, the very first thing in the very first meeting, the senior officers sat around the room, and one of them said to me, you've just taken over the force with the lowest morale in the world. That's what they told me. Nobody's told me that in the Virgin Islands so far. And it's difficult to sense, because when I met my colleagues last Wednesday, and there was about 120 or so, so not all of the force, but about 120 were in the room, both police staff and police officers. I spoke, I suppose, for about 20 minutes or so, maybe longer. I can waffle on. I was getting rounds of applause, which took me by surprise. But then that's what I call the honeymoon period, isn't it? People are always going to be nice to you when you first arrive. So I suppose I'm guessing that people aren't going to say to me initially, you know, morale's dreadful and this, that and the other. But yes, the Welfare Association, I met with them Friday, and I'm going to have regular meetings with them since, and they have, on behalf of the officers, raised a number of issues that I could see would have an impact upon morale if they weren't addressed. And you're right to say, you know, it wouldn't be proper to go into detail, but I think one that I know has been public knowledge for some time is that a number of officers received admonishments some time back, and they're very upset about that, and they're challenging that. And I have told those officers, I've told the Police Welfare Association, if they wish to bring a fresh request to me as the new Commissioner, I will take that seriously. Clearly, I await their decision on that.
Hi, Katie King with the BVI Beacon. You just spoke about your desire to have an open, honest relationship with the press. Back in October, police started omitting names from their weekly arrest blotters. Do you support this decision, or do you have any plans to potentially reverse the policy? Okay,
yeah, I'm aware of that, because before coming here, of course, I was reading all of your press articles, including about myself before coming. It's a contentious point, Katie, because I have an absolute duty to protect innocent people, and there is always a danger of having trial by media, and we can't have people being accused of something they haven't done. Even when charged, they're not guilty of that offence until a court has decided that. However, I am acutely aware that colleagues in the press need to understand who's being dealt with, when they're being dealt with, because that is of interest to the community, that's of interest to the public, and you need to be able to follow a story through. So what I've already done is I've contacted the UK, the National Police Chiefs Council have a very good policy on this matter, where it lays out very clearly when names will be given and when names aren't given out. I know that the policy has just been recently updated, so I've asked them to send us their latest policy. Now, I am of course at risk now of going back on what I said earlier about not coming here and saying we know best, you know, and telling you what to do. But I actually am a great believer that if there's already good practice out there, why reinvent the wheel? So what I'm going to do, Katie, as soon as I get that policy, I'm going to look at that to see whether that will bear relevance to here. And if that policy provides a happy compromise between the desire of the local media and my absolute requirement to protect people's rights, then I will implement that policy. And you, of course, are going to be the first to know because I will share that with you.
Commissioner, you made mention of increasing the confidence with the public. You gave us good figures for 2015, but there are still concerns. There are still major concerns. The police continue to ask for assistance from the public, but the major crimes, the robberies continue, they're not being solved. Is it the police is not doing something? The recent robbery with One Mart, everything was presented. Everything, a lot of people were taken up, they were let loose. Is the police not doing something? What is it you want from the public again? Because I believe the public has the confidence by giving you the information, but the crimes are not being solved, the major crimes, the murders. Do you think that the police mode of interrogation is harsh enough? We don't understand what's happening. They're not catching the people.
I disagree. Why do I disagree? Well, I got asked, it might have even been yourself, Zan, I can't remember who it was, forgive me if it wasn't, but I got asked in one of my previous one-to-one interviews what I was going to do about the 35 unsolved murders. There aren't 35 unsolved murders in the British Virgin Islands. I can go back as far as 2001 to 2016. We've got a current detection rate of 55% for murders. So 55% of all murders that have occurred since 2001 have been detected and people have been charged. That compares very, very favourably internationally with what the police service are doing. Now, as was said yesterday when I met the Premier in the caucus, one murder is one too many. So the remaining unsolved murders, of which, just glancing at my figures at the moment, I think, I'll be corrected, but I think it's about 25 outstanding at the moment.
47, subtract.
Yeah.
26 from that.
26.
26 from the 47, 19.
Okay. They are not closed because they haven't been solved. They are still subject to investigation, but you know, the reality is sometimes a murder inquiry can just grind to a halt because there is no more evidence available. Nobody has come forward. Nothing else was found at the scene. But that doesn't mean we give up on those victims or their families. One of the important strategies that is an international strategy adopted around the world is cold case review. And cold case review means that when new technologies come online, like more recently we've had DNA as a real breakthrough technology, forensically speaking, you know, we will go back and revisit those inquiries to establish is there anything else that can be done. And we'll get them looked at independently, not locally, but independently, fresh set of eyes. Well, that'll continue to be done and will be done for unsolved murders because they are serious matters and you're right to raise it. More recently, you've talked about one of the robberies. Well, we've had 7 robberies since the 1st of January here. And you're right to point out that in the particular one you spoke about, we immediately made 9 arrests, but there were no charges. There are a number of lines of inquiry very much alive as we speak on that. And in fact, I had a personal briefing from the Detective Superintendent just yesterday morning on where we are with the One Mart robbery investigation. And I want to make it clear, my job is to keep these communities safe. Our job is to keep the communities safe. The communities aren't going to be safe if people are living in fear. And if people think that they can get away with charging into supermarkets or restaurants or stopping people on the street and producing a gun in the cowardly way that they do to demand money, if they think that that's going to be allowed to be got away with, they've got another thing coming because we will continue to hunt them. We will continue to search them out. But the other part of your question was what do I want from the community? And I'm acutely aware that a lot of communities, again not unique to the British Virgin Islands, I can assure you, a lot of communities are frightened to talk to the police service. They're frightened of being identified. They're frightened that what they're telling us won't be kept in confidence. So we've got to look at that. And it goes back to the earlier question, and perhaps one of the other priorities I've got to address is how do we come up with a system that's foolproof, that allows the community to give us community intelligence, to tell us what's going on, without the community feeling they are at risk by doing that? And that is a big challenge, but it's something that I am going to treat as a priority. Because I'm telling you now, in the example you've just given, the one mark robbery, the answer lies with the community. There are people out there who know who did it. And I take this opportunity now to say to them, come forward and speak to me personally. If you don't want to speak to my officers, come and speak to me personally. Get a message to me personally. There are people out there who know who did this, and we can stop this sort of behaviour, and we can make sure that the community stays safe, because otherwise we're going to see another tragedy here. It's as simple as that.
The next question I ask, if in terms of the police, if they are harsh enough in the interrogation to get answers.
Well, people have often asked me, whether police interrogations are tough enough, and whether we do enough, and so on and so forth. We're bound by the law. The minute police officers operate outside the law, then the police service is lost, because all trust and confidence goes. That's why police officers end up being interdicted. That's why police officers end up being arrested, because they've gone outside the law. And treating a suspect outside of the legislation, assaulting a suspect, threatening a suspect, intimidating a suspect, we do that, then we cease to be a professional police service. So we must operate within the law. And sometimes that's frustrating, even for us. And sometimes we rely on decisions outside of our own organisation. We have to present evidence and someone else makes the decision. But we have to accept that decision, because our job is to just go out there and find the evidence to bring people to justice. So no, I'm not a great believer that we need to be more forceful. I think the legislation more than allows for us to be able to do our job. The reality is solving some of these most serious crimes, I repeat what I said, comes from intelligence and information from the community. It's a two-way partnership. We've got a job to keep the community safe. The community have got a job to ensure their safety by cooperating and working alongside us.
You spoke about having an anti-corruption initiative, right? And you spoke about rooting out the bad apples, but what do you plan to do to actually prevent it, so it actually doesn't reach the stage of rooting it out? And secondly, if you could, what do you think accounts for this type of corruption in not only here but police forces in general?
Yeah. Well, we could get into a debate here about whether police officers are paid sufficiently for the job they do. I'm not going to do that. I'll leave that one in the air for you to think about. What I'll say is this, is that there are occasions when, in the line of our work as police officers, we come across individuals, or we come across situations where temptation is placed before us. I remember many years ago, as a young officer working in the UK, I was dealing with the sad set of circumstances of a lady passing away in her home, and one of the jobs we had to do was secure the home. And in them days, the important thing was you had to make sure there were no valuables left around, because the home was now going to be empty. The lady had passed away. And I opened a drawer, and we're talking about the 1980s here, and there was over £20,000, it turned out, in the drawer, in loose money, sitting just in this drawer, in this dresser. Now, to a young Bobby, to a young police officer at that time, £20,000 was a life's earnings. Temptation is there, of course it's there. But you're either a sworn officer, sworn to the Crown and sworn to the duty of the public, or you're a criminal. There's no in between as far as I'm concerned, and I'm a sworn police officer, so that money got bagged up, got put in, and the exact amount of money came out the other end. But I absolutely understand how temptation gets in the way. And also, whether I like it or not, there are criminals operating around the world, including here, who are in the position to offer significant temptation to some of my officers. And some of my officers will be weak enough to take that temptation. All I can do is to put in place systems that seek to prevent it as far as possible. And you do that by first of all, strong leadership and very strong supervision, adherence to force policies that we put in place, and that's even down to the small things like, if there's a drug seizure, if there's a money seizure, who's supervising that, how much was there at the beginning, is it still there at the end, checks all the way, checks and balances, whether officers are allowed to have employment outside of the police, what we call setting out tests for officers, honesty tests, where we can actually go in and ask somebody to go and actually test an officer for us independently by leaving a wallet on the counter or whatever and seeing what happens. There's a whole range of things you can do. There's some very good counter-corruption strategies around. What I'm not going to do, Davian, is I'm not going to detail to you here for the media the details of what a counter-corruption strategy would look like here, because it's an internal strategy, and the point is it's designed to catch people out. And if I tell you what it is, first of all, I'm not going to catch anyone out with it. Suffice to say, if I've got any dishonest officers still working in the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, it is my intent and my desire to try and capture them and root them out, because you are entitled to be served by honest officers.
I'm going to limit everyone to one question, whether you choose to use it one more round and then...
Granted, Commissioner, you did mention the need to recruit, but the public continues to complain about officer visibility. I don't know if you have a plan in the interim while you try to get the force boosted, how you're going to address this.
Okay, visibility is a really interesting issue for me. This morning I went to visit the DPP at 9 o'clock this morning. His offices are just over the other side in Road Town. And as we went up the main road in Road Town, just opposite the Digicel shop, there were 2 officers on foot patrol, full uniform. Did any of you see them? I did. Well, of course you didn't, because you weren't there, were you? But the point being is, it depends where the police officers are at the time. Now, I could be clever if I wanted to. I could stick every day police officer to stand at the ferry terminal every time one of the ferries docks. I'll stick another one outside the government buildings every time the Premier and his team get out of their cars, just so that they see him. And where else could we stick one? 1 or 2 places, I'm sure, where we know the public are going to be first thing in the morning when they're coming to work and last thing at night when they go home. And I can solve that problem, because people say, oh yeah, there's a lot of police about. And I do recognise that that is reassuring to the public. It doesn't necessarily mean they're actually doing a great job. So the art, of course, is to be visible but also to be effective. And that's where we've got to get to. But I'm not taking your question lightly. I know I was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek there. The point I'm making is it is an important issue, and the Deputy Commissioner has already discussed with me in my first 2 weeks about reviewing where our officers are. My philosophy is we've got to have police officers doing the right things in the right place at the right time. But that doesn't always mean they're going to be visible to the public. A number of my police officers, by absolute necessity, will be in plain clothes, undercover, in unmarked cars, working in darkness. But they're still catching criminals, and they're catching serious criminals by doing that. Last night, we made an excellent arrest by 2 of our officers on their own initiative, out there, probably weren't seen by too many members of the public, but arrested somebody who we suspect may be involved in a number of recent burglaries. It was a great arrest, and I've already asked to write a personal note of thanks to the officers. So visibility, yes, very important, gives reassurance, gives confidence, but it can't be that the whole force is going to be 100% visible. There's an absolute necessity to have a mixture.
One of the criticisms the force faces is its ability or lack of ability to deal with white-collar crime.
Yeah.
Do you think this has to do with lack of intelligence, lack of capability, resources? How would you respond to those concerns?
I suppose when we talk about white-collar crime, in the main, I guess we're talking about fraud and serious fraud and financial investigations. And of course, we've got our very own financial investigation department here, haven't we? Yeah. Which I take nothing away from. It would be fair to say to you that the average police force, and I don't think the RVIPF are any different, lacks the specialist skills to do serious fraud and financial investigations. We do have some skills in that area, but even in the UK, you know, there are 43 police forces in England and Wales, and those 43 chiefs made a decision to give the City of London Police the job on behalf of 42 other forces to deal with serious fraud, simply because actually getting this level of skills and technical expertise that is needed is extremely expensive as well. We're talking about highly qualified, highly technically efficient and effective people. And they're not all police officers, of course. You have to bring in people with expertise who don't need to carry a warrant card to do the job, but are needed to give you the evidence for a court case. So, frankly, I wouldn't want to take that on because I think it would be a very expensive thing for us to do because of the cost to bring in those level of resource in. However, if that expertise is lacking and that level of investigation is required, I won't hesitate in recommending to the National Security Council that we need to bring in outside expertise to do that. And I'll be frank, I suspect if I bring in more outside expertise, there will be some areas of criticism for that because I will say you're not using local people. But I think it's such a technical area that if we haven't got it here locally, and I mean if, then we've got to go to the outside to resolve that problem. If the technical expertise does exist here in the islands, then great. Let's recruit those people in to assist us to deal with those very, very difficult white-collar crimes that I think you're alluding to.
Commissioner, I believe you would have gone through the books for those unsolved murders to know those that are already far advanced, close to being solved. I don't even in any position to say what case is being given priority at this time, what case is close to being solved. And on behalf of the media, you spoke about the information from the police do not come to the media fast enough. You spoke about an arrest last evening. We don't know anything about that. We should have already had that information. Sometimes arrests happened, and we got to wait hours at the end of the day to get information. I'm asking you to work more closer with the PR person. That is what caused us, the media, to put out information because it's coming too late from the police.
Well, I agree and I disagree with you on this one. You'll be pleased to hear, no doubt. I disagree that you should have had the information about last night because I only learnt about it 30 minutes ago before I came in here. So that comes under my desk, that comes under the Deputy Commissioner's desk. We look at it. I have had the conversation in the last hour with the Deputy Commissioner saying what a great job that was last night. Let's get that story out. So, you know, there is a reality about timing, but I take your point. I take your point. If we can get that information out quicker, it's no big secret. It's a good news story for the public. So,
but that's a bad, Commissioner. Something happened last evening. 30 minutes ago, you got the information. So if you get the information about 5 to 6 hours after, when are we going to get the information? Tomorrow?
Zan, do you really think that they're going to ring me at 2 o'clock in the morning to tell me about an arrest?
You're the Commissioner, sir. Why not?
Because I get very angry about being woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell me about an arrest. I don't need to know. I don't need to know and you don't need to know at 2 o'clock in the morning. What we need to agree is timely information because this is about letting the public know what's going on. And I'm as keen as you are to get that story out there so the public know we are catching people. But let's be realistic about this. You know, police officers work 24/7. Our operational officers are out there all night and all day. I don't expect to get calls in the middle of the night, nor does my deputy unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, I'm paid to respond, get out of bed and deal with that. But a good arrest, that can wait till I walk in the office. Sorry, what was the other question?
The unsolved murders.
Oh, the unsolved murders, yeah. The obvious thing, I suppose, to say here is the most recent murders are the ones that are going to be the most live in terms of investigation, simply because historic murder inquiries have probably reached a point in time where, as I said, you know, the evidence trail has gone cold and we're waiting for something else to come along to reignite that investigation. So you'll all be aware of the tragic case of the missing young lady from the islands who now sadly is a murder inquiry and that is receiving top priority by the superintendent's team as we speak. But I go back to my point, you know, if suddenly something comes up in relation to a murder inquiry that happened 10 years ago that's still open, and if that suddenly reaches the superintendent's desk, he's going to suddenly go, right, we need to now reopen that one and start looking at that. So they're never ever closed. But of course, the more recent an incident, the more likely is of getting the evidence, and the more likely there is of a detection.
You're close to solving that one? Mr. Smith, you're close?
I'm not going to make any comment about whether we're close to solving it at this stage, because that would be unfair on the detectives, and you'll never see me talk about specific details of an ongoing inquiry like that. But what I do commit to is it's clearly something of public interest, and as soon as we've got something that is an update, we will give it to you, and we'll give it to you timely, so you're not waiting for it.
Mr. Deputy Commissioner, while we're here, could you elaborate more on the arrest last night?
The matter is still subject to investigation, so I can't give too many details about it. Of course, but the police officers, whilst on patrol, stopped a person and conducted a search which revealed certain items of evidence which we are conducting investigations into.
I think it's worth adding that we were conscious that there was a number of break-ins in the last week or so, probably about 5 or 6, and we responded to that by dedicating a team which we put out. Again, wouldn't have been a visible team, using intelligence that we gathered, and the net effect of that is there were no break-ins over the weekend while that team were operating, and an arrest last night on suspicion of burglary. So I think the point is that we've got to find the balance between good news stories that give public reassurance and the necessity to manage police inquiries and follow leads without being inhibited through information coming out too early. Because let's be honest with each other, your audience is the 28,000 odd people living in this area, plus worldwide audiences. So it's a regrettable fact that some of our criminals, not all of them, because there's a lot of very stupid criminals in the world, but some of our criminals are able to read and write, and they read your stories too. And if we give you too many clues in your stories, they're going to work out what the police service are up to too. So we've got to strike a balance.
The Beacon was informed in October that police have an official media policy. However, requests to see a copy of this policy were denied. Would you consider making the media policy open to the public?
The police service has a load of internal policies. Policies are just purely about how the police service runs and gives guidance to officers both on the ground and senior officers as to what is expected and what's not expected. They're not public documents. The islands don't have a Freedom of Information Act. However, I'm not actually that adverse to sharing internal documentation with you if I don't see any particular risk. The truth is, Katie, I haven't read that policy. If you're keen to see a copy of it, I will ask Diana to let me see it. If I think there's nothing in there that would cause damage to the police service and its reputation, which I can't think there would be, I'll make it public.
Let me throw in this last one. Commissioner, a few years ago, the police reported that seems as though they were making a breakthrough on the Ken Doyle pen murder. Nothing has happened. The family were glad. A breakthrough, nothing has happened. This is one of the back cases at this time, or if it still looking at that. And secondly, that forensic report of this body that was found, can it be made available?
Right, I'll answer the second question first. The answer is absolutely not. We would be in breach of all of the criminal justice laws if we made that available, because that will form a critical part of any prosecution, and the only people allowed to see that in advance are the investigators and the Director of Public Prosecution, because otherwise, if we end up with an offender on trial and then that offender's defence stands up and says, but you shared half the evidence with the press in advance, my client can't have a fair trial, what you'll see is serious offenders getting off time and time again. And this is the point, you know, you're rightly, Zan, raising concern about serious offenders not being caught. But there's an equal concern here that serious offenders will get off in court if we give too much information out about investigations. And whilst that's frustrating to you, because, you know, this is your bread and butter to get the news out there, there are certain things that will be an absolute no-no, and that forensic report would fall into that category. I can't make any specific comment about the murder from 10 years ago that you spoke about there, and I wouldn't, to be frank, I wouldn't expect the superintendent to either. I just repeat what I said. All murders that aren't detected will remain under investigation, because we owe it to the victim of that crime, who's no longer with us, and of course to the living relatives and friends of that victim. But no police service in the world has a 100% detection rate for murder. What we've got to try and do, of course, is bring about a change that prevents murder. You know, the police service can't be responsible for murders happening. The police service can only try and do their best to prevent them and try and detect them. This is about society and about behaviours and about what's acceptable and what's not. And if you as the community, and I'm addressing the whole community here of the British Virgin Islands, if you think it's acceptable for your sons, your daughters, your aunts, your uncles, your friends, your relatives, your mums and dads to be running around with firearms, to be threatening people, to assault people, to beat people, to break into people's homes, etc., etc. If you think that's acceptable for somebody you know to be doing that, then you should rightly be living in fear, because you are creating a society that will be unsafe. If there's any part in you that thinks that that kind of behaviour is unacceptable, then you need to start cooperating with the police service, because we're your last line of defence and we're here to detect the crime and take those offenders off the street. And I've already told the prison superintendent, Mr. Foote, that I will take great pleasure in making sure his prison remains full until such time as people start to change their behaviour here and live in peace and harmony as a community. You know, at Christmas, the deputy, when he was the acting commissioner, he put out a press statement about people being much nicer to each other. I read it myself over in the UK, you know, about behaviours in general within the community. And I applaud that. There's not many police leaders actually go out to the community like that and say, you know what, you ought to think about your behaviour towards each other. And I just think that's a lesson we can all reflect on.
On that note, I want to thank you very much to the media for coming. Thank you, Commissioner.